Hi all, welcome to the first ever video series of the Digital Health Digest. Those that have been following me for the last year know that I have been publishing monthly interviews with founders, thought leaders and investors from the DTX industry to discuss their learnings, current trends and advice and much more. Now, the newsletter is not only going virtual, but it's also going to be focused on the digital health industry more broadly. And with that, our first episode, we have a fantastic guest joining me, Meri, co-founder of Lindus Health. How are you, Meri?
Hey, thanks for having me. Good, thank you. Good. Excited to dive in.
Really excited to have you. And I had the pleasure of meeting you last year at one of the DTX conference series where I learned more about your background. And as I remember rightly, Meri, you come from originally a VC background from both the health and biotech space, but also more interestingly, you were a serial clinical trial participant.
That is more interesting. You're right. Yeah.
And this is obviously what sort of how Lindus Health came about. And for those that don't know, Lindus Health runs radically faster, more reliable clinical trials for life science partners. And this includes the digital health industry. So, really excited to have you, Meri. Thank you for joining us. And I don't know if there's anything that you want to add to that introduction. I know that was fairly brief, but please go ahead.
No, I mean pretty comprehensive. I would say, I just sort of add to that yeah, you're right that the clinical trial participant part is important, and it was the kind of the terrible experiences I'd had as a participant patient that kind of opened my eyes to the inefficiency in the clinical trial space. And
Yeah.
ultimately, patients and sponsors lose out, right? Because a bad experience for patients means poor quality data, means a longer time to develop, bring new treatments to market, and just everyone loses. So yeah.
Absolutely. No, it's always more interesting when it comes from a personal experience in terms of how a company is founded. So, yeah, I just want to get straight into it, Meri. One of I guess the most obvious question, one of the questions I come across regularly with the clients that I support is, the common misconceptions that you hear when considering digital health clinical trials. What is it that you come across or you hear about regularly?
Ooh, yeah. Yeah, I think a bunch of things. A lot of them boil down to, digital health trials are not pharma drug trials, and there are important differences. And I think people can either assume they have the same cost and timeline profile as a pharma drug trial, which just mean like multi-millions minimum, multi-years, if not up to a decade, or they can see them from sort of totally the other lens and assume that they are, just like almost like surveys and not at all scientifically rigorous. The truth is kind of in the middle, and that, when designed properly, trials for digital health interventions, digital health products can, be very rigorous, but they also needn't be, nearly as costly or as complex as pharma drug trials. And so it's about navigating, those two extremes.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because I think immediately when you think of clinical trials, you go to pharma, right? Your mind goes naturally to pharma. So, what are the benefits of a digital health company conducting a clinical trial?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to say in abstract, but basically, you either want to run a trial for a specific regulatory pathway, so to get your device marketed and approved as like a regulatory product, or as general evidence generation, and that could be to support everything from white papers and even like a direct to consumer approach all the way through to a more approach via like B2B channels, payers, health systems, etc. There are some cases where you can sell into a health system without having to go through for like, let's say like a care pathway or a digitally powered care pathway without having to, consider registering that as any kind of like medical device or medical product. But like in all of those cases, clinical evidence in a clinical trial is like basically necessary or at the very least, like very important. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think it has an impact on the sort of attractiveness to investors and ability to scale at all?
Yeah, I mean, you know, all else being equal, of course, like having clinical evidence is better than not for investors. I would say, like, for most investors, it's not going to be the be all and end all. However, if your company, your product, needs to go down, or like, your only route to market is B2B via payers, etc., then like it does become, pretty important. And so as an investor, you'd be, silly not to carefully consider like the clinical evidence when deciding whether or not to invest.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously following a clinical trial, there is still a process of evidence generation. So what happens beyond the clinical trial process?
Yeah, actually, that's a good point because clinical trial is like only one part of the process, and I'd say like equally important are the sort of design and figuring out what you actually your target population, what you actually want to show, and evidence, and then the clinical trial part is just like executing that. But then you're also thinking about disseminating the results. What I guess in sort of pharma world you kind of call medical affairs, which
Hmm.
it's like, do you publish the results in a journal? Do you work with I don't know, do you kind of work with key opinion leaders, etc. So yeah, it's kind of the clinical trial part, I would say, is probably like the most costly and time consuming part necessarily.
Hmm.
It's important that you see it as part of like the whole evidence generation process. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for that, Mary. That's really interesting on that, and something that I wanted to pick up with you as well. We touched on a couple of weeks ago when we last spoke, and that is polyindication digital health solutions. Really interested to dive into this because I'm sure, well, I would like to think most people are aware of what this is, but what are you seeing as the benefits for polyindication digital health solutions at the moment?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, I would say it's rather like the rest of pharma and life sciences after
Hmm.
spending like 15 years in this paradigm of like, oh, we're just going to look at very, very precise diseases and populations, you know, run kind of design a product for those, hope we can charge, like 100 grand for a dose regimen minimum, and then just do that for like every disease. Now, particularly with kind of GLP-1s have catalyzed this, they've realized like, oh, wait, with one piece of biology, one mechanism of action, we can actually impact, all these different indications. And kind of like most digital health solutions have been like this from the off, where like,
Mm.
let's say you have like a care pathway that integrates maybe like a digital therapeutic product, and that works via, I don't know, cognitive behavioral therapy. With that core product, you could use it for like type 2 diabetes, but also NASH, MASH, and so like I think the digital health companies have always been in this mindset, but now like these kinds of products are more just like in vogue for the rest of the industry, which is long overdue, frankly.
Mhm.
And so I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities for digital health products to really lean into this and talk about like, yeah, this is one product or one pathway, but we can treat all these different conditions, and automatically your market size increases because that's each one of those conditions has a market.
Yeah,
I think, yeah, that's just really exciting and a massive tailwind for companies in the space.
yeah, amazing. Are there any companies that you think are doing this really well at the moment?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so like in the digital health space, you've got companies like yeah, I guess like Sidekick who've been doing this for a while, Vivera, kind of. I'm mainly thinking of, well, I'll try and categorize it a bit. So you have sort of more like general digital health companies like like Sidekick, who are looking at both kind of standalone digital products and then kind of
Hmm.
companions to a drug program. You've got companies like Vivera, who are doing this in certain like payer frameworks. So they're very good at looking at the DIGA pathway in Germany. You've got companies like Sigrid, who are in the metabolic space, who are wrapping sort of a combination of like a sort of physical product and like a digital product.
Yeah,
Another example of that is like Habitual, also in the metabolic space.
yeah.
And so yeah, all these companies are sort of blending digital and physical products, not just looking narrowly at one disease, but looking at a whole spectrum of
Mm,
related conditions.
yeah. Some really great companies that you mentioned there. I think one thing that I think about when we're looking at polyindication solutions is it going to be, do you think, sort of a race to the top in terms of this? And will those who get to the top and manage to get there first succeed, and those who aren't able to get there as quick maybe fall behind or by the wayside?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think it's a tough one to answer because unlike, say, like normal, software or like, I don't know, something like a normal consumer product, the route to market is really different depending on different geographies. And
Yeah.
so you might see, and a little bit like you can sort of see happening, like, oh, like this is the German market champion for this category because, you know, they've got a great product and they've also mastered, you know, the route to market like via DIGA, versus this is the US champion because they've really mastered the route to market via, you know, via payers. So I think you might, but it would probably like, there'd be like the dimension of like products or disease categories and then like, you know, geography maybe.
Geography. No, that's a really interesting mix there. So it would be, you know, one who might be the key player in the US might not necessarily be the key player in Germany, but still there's lots of opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, because even like, you know, type 2 diabetes or weight management alone in Germany is like a multi, you know, almost tens of billions of dollars opportunity. So, you know, even if you just become like the country champion in one of these areas, it's still a huge opportunity. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, yeah, and I think that's a really interesting concept and something that will be, you know, interesting to watch as well as the digital health industry matures, and see who will follow suit.
Yeah.
I always end with this, Meri. It's interesting to get your take on your sort of predictions for 2024 for the digital health industry, even though we are already in May, so not long left. But also beyond that as well. What are you seeing from your perspective, from Lindus Health, and also personally?
Yeah. So yeah, obviously, like, you know, the digital, I'd say like the whole digital health space has had, you know, a tough time over the last kind of year and a half. And, you know, I think some of that is like a lot of the, you know, froth, I guess, or like super high valuations in 2021 kind of unwinding and taking a couple of years to unwind. But, you know, yeah, I mean, it feels like we've definitely kind of turned a corner in terms of overall sentiment. I would say we're also going to continue to see the boundaries blur between digital health and like non-digital health. And that's a great thing. You know, there's this like, the industry for so long has had this like ridiculously myopic kind of view and or sort of blinkered view of like, oh, this is a drug, therefore it works, therefore I'll pay, you know, X for each quantity of evidence. And this is digital health, this is like snake oil. But, you know, I mentioned a lot of companies already. I think, you know, more and more you're seeing kind of combination products where, or like, you know, a good example is like the Peters, the new Peters FDA pathway, which is a sort of dedicated pathway for drug device combination products. I think that's just one sign that you're seeing the lines start to blur. You're also like on the investor sentiment. It's hard to evidence apart from anecdote, but you know, all of the sort of traditional like tech investors are really starting to look a lot more closely at, you know, basically like therapeutics companies. And I think that's going to reward companies and products that kind of straddle both lines. So yeah, I think we're going to continue to see kind of a blurring of the lines, and maybe even in, you know, 2025, the notion of digital health will be kind of obsolete because everything is sort of digital health or has an element of digital by default, and vice versa. You know, traditional life sciences will accept you know, a kind of digital layer, be that, you know, even just like, I don't know, companion diagnostics or digital endpoints to go with their drug clinical trials, all the way up to like drug device combination products.
No, absolutely. That's a great point. Essentially, it's just looking at the healthcare ecosystem as more holistically, and rather than having, you know, isolated silos of it, and bringing together everyone for the benefit of the patient ultimately.
Yeah, definitely.
Amazing. Well, Meri, lovely to see you again and to catch up. Thank you for sharing all of your thoughts. If anybody has any sort of questions for Meri and Lindus Health and the brilliant work that they're doing, please do get in touch with him via LinkedIn or email. And yeah, hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks so much. Great to chat today.